Alexander Kane had exactly 3 thoughts in the 5 seconds after Princess Liara pointed at him and declared, "Mom, I want him," to the entire assembled royal court. First, this cannot be happening. Second, this is definitely happening. Third, I am going to die of mortification in front of several hundred aliens, and it will be the most embarrassing death in human history. 6 months ago, Alex had been living peacefully on Kepler Station, a remote mining colony where the most exciting thing that happened was occasionally discovering a particularly pure vein of iridium. He'd been happy there, content, blissfully anonymous in a way that felt like safety after years of very deliberately avoiding anything resembling attention. Then the Terran Alliance Diplomatic Corps had tracked him down with an invitation that had been phrased as a request, but felt like an order. Princess Liara of the Vairathi sovereignty had personally asked for a human representative to attend her consort selection ceremony as part of cultural exchange initiatives. Would Mr. Kane be willing to serve as that representative? Alex had said no, multiple times, in increasingly clear language. But the alliance had been persistent in that bureaucratic way that wore down resistance through sheer repetition. And eventually, Alex had run out of excuses that didn't involve explaining exactly why he really didn't want to be anywhere near Vairathi royalty. So here he stood, wearing formal civilian clothes that felt like they were strangling him, surrounded by beings from a dozen species who'd spent the last hour positioning themselves strategically to catch the princess's attention, all of them hoping to be chosen for courtship that could eventually lead to standing beside the future queen. And somehow, impossibly, disastrously, she'd chosen him. The hall had gone from polite murmurs to shocked silence so complete that Alex could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his neural implant. Every eye in the massive space was turned toward him, hundreds of beings from across the sovereignty and beyond, all staring at the unremarkable human, standing near the perimeter like he'd been trying to blend into the decorative columns. Princess Liara was walking toward him now, and Alex's brain stuttered through several possible responses. Run, tempting, but probably would cause diplomatic incident. Faint, cowardly, but would at least get him out of immediate attention. Explain that there's been a terrible mistake. True, but unclear if anyone would listen. His mouth went with option 3, before his brain could veto it. Your Highness, I think there's been some kind of confusion. There's no confusion, Liara said, and her voice carried the kind of clear certainty that came from years of being raised to project confidence, even when making unprecedented decisions. I've made my choice. You, Alex Kane, I choose you. But I'm not a candidate. I'm here as diplomatic courtesy, cultural exchange observer. I'm background scenery in uncomfortable formal wear. Alex heard himself babbling and couldn't quite stop. The actual candidates are over there. He gestured vaguely toward the center of the hall where impressively titled nobles and warriors and scholars stood frozen in various states of shock and affront. I know where the formal candidates are, Liara said patiently. I've reviewed their profiles extensively. I'm sure they're all very qualified. I'm choosing you anyway. Why? The question came out more desperately than Alex intended. Liara's expression shifted to something softer. Because when I looked around this hall at everyone performing their best qualities for evaluation, you were the only person who looked like you genuinely didn't want to be noticed. Everyone else is calculating, positioning, presenting. You're just existing. That's rare. That matters to me. Your Highness, being bad at networking is not a qualification for royal consort. No, but being comfortable enough with yourself that you don't need external validation. That's a qualification for being someone worth knowing. Liara had reached him now, close enough that Alex could see the exact moment when her amber eyes, all Vairathi had them, genetic trait that marked royal bloodlines even more clearly than their long, elegant ears, shifted from formal decision-making to genuine curiosity. I don't know you yet, Alex Kane, but I want to. That's what tonight is for, making choices about who to know better, and I choose you. Before Alex could formulate another objection, A voice from the royal dais cut through his panic. Liara, a moment. Queen Thessara had risen from her throne, and Alex felt a different kind of alarm spike through him, because the queen was moving down from the dais with purpose, coming closer. And if she got a clear look at his face. Too late. Recognition hit the queen's expression like lightning, her eyes widening, her ears flattening against her head in the Varathi expression that meant shock profound enough to override royal composure. "You," Thessara said, and her voice carried harmonics that Alex's translator struggled with, disbelief and recognition, and something that might have been vindication or might have been something else entirely. "You're the one who saved me." And there it was. The thing Alex had been avoiding for 20 years, the reason he'd tried so hard to stay away from anything involving Varathi royalty, the incident that he'd buried so deep in classified archives and erased records that he'd thought it was safely forgotten. Apparently he'd thought wrong. "Your Majesty," Alex managed, falling back on formality because it was the only defense he had left. "That was a long time ago. I'm sure you've confused me with someone else. 20 years ago, on Can 7. The diplomatic embassy explosion. You pulled me from the collapsed building, stabilized my injuries, called for help, and then disappeared before I could thank you properly or learn your name." Thessara moved closer, and Alex fought the instinct to step back because backing away from a queen in her own hall was probably terrible protocol. "I searched for you, for months, used every resource the sovereignty possessed, but you'd erased yourself so thoroughly that I eventually had to conclude you died in the secondary explosions." "I didn't die, I just went back to my life." Alex kept his voice steady through force of will. "Your Majesty, I did what anyone would do in that situation. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't special. It was just being in the right place to help someone who needed it." "You saved the crown princess's life and refused reward or recognition," Thessara corrected, her tone carrying disbelief. "That is not what anyone does. That is what someone does who values life over advantage." The court was absolutely silent now, everyone processing this revelation. The human who'd been selected by the princess was apparently also the mysterious savior who'd rescued the current queen decades ago. The coincidence was too dramatic, too perfect, the kind of thing that happened in stories but not in real diplomatic ceremonies. Liara was staring between her mother and Alex with an expression that suggested she was rapidly recalculating everything she thought she knew. "Mom, are you saying that Alex saved your life? That he's the person you've been searching for?" "I'm saying that 20 years ago, this man pulled me from a collapsed building, kept me alive until help arrived, and then vanished without accepting reward or recognition. I've owed him a debt I couldn't repay for 2 decades. Thessara turned her attention back to Alex. "And now my daughter has chosen you as a potential consort. Either this is the most remarkable coincidence in sovereignty history, or the universe has a sense of dramatic irony." "It's coincidence, Your Majesty. I had no idea the princess would. I didn't even want to be here. I tried to decline the invitation multiple times." Alex realized he was still babbling and made himself stop. "I'm not trying to leverage what happened on Can 7. I'm not trying to collect on debts. I just wanted to live quietly and avoid exactly this kind of attention." "Which is exactly what makes you remarkable," Liara said quietly. "Alex, everyone in this hall is here because they want something from me. Power, alliance, proximity to the throne. You're here despite trying very hard not to be, and apparently you've spent 20 years avoiding recognition for saving my mother's life. That's not calculation. That's someone who genuinely doesn't want advantage from proximity to power. That's exactly what I was hoping to find and didn't think existed. Your Highness, I'm really just a mining engineer who's bad at saying no to diplomatic corps bureaucrats. You're reading way too much into my general desire to be left alone." "Am I?" Liara smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way that made Alex's careful defenses waver slightly. "Alex, I've spent months studying potential consorts, reading profiles, understanding political implications, learning what each candidate could offer the sovereignty. All of them impressive, all of them valuable, all of them making me feel like I was selecting a political asset rather than a person I might want to spend time with. She gestured at the assembled nobles and candidates. Then I looked around this hall tonight and saw you standing there like you were trying to become invisible, and something in me just knew. Knew that someone working that hard to avoid attention wasn't performing for advantage, wasn't calculating for maximum effect, was just being themselves without caring what impression they made. That's not a qualification, Your Highness. That's just social awkwardness dressed up as integrity. Or it's integrity so genuine that it looks like social awkwardness to people used to everyone performing. Liara moved closer, and Alex found himself unable to step back despite every instinct screaming that he should. Let me court you properly, Alex Kane. Let me explore whether my instinct about your character is accurate. You're free to refuse. I'm not commanding you, and Mom's not leveraging the debt you're too modest to claim. But I'm asking. Let me know you better and see if what I sensed in that brief moment was real. Alex looked at her, really looked, and saw determination mixed with genuine curiosity, hope mixed with uncertainty, the expression of someone making a choice that mattered despite not knowing if it would work out. He thought about running, about explaining firmly that this was a terrible idea, about pointing out all the extremely good reasons why a mining engineer with no political value should not be courted by the heir to one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. But he also thought about the fact that Princess Liara had looked at a room full of impressive candidates performing their best qualities, and had chosen the one person trying desperately not to be chosen. That took either terrible judgment or remarkable insight, and Alex found himself curious which one it was. Your Highness, he said carefully, if I agree to this, and I'm not saying I am, but hypothetically, what happens when you realize I'm exactly as boring and unimpressive as I keep telling you I am? Then we'll have learned that together, and I'll thank you for your honesty, and we'll both move forward knowing we tried. Liara's smile widened. But I don't think you're boring or unimpressive, Alex. I think you're impressive in ways this court doesn't usually value. Let me prove whether I'm right. Alex looked at Queen Thessara, who was watching this exchange with an expression that suggested she was seeing something she'd waited 20 years to see. He looked at the assembled court, hundreds of beings who would judge and speculate, and probably make his life significantly more complicated than he'd ever wanted it to be. He looked back at Liara, who was waiting for his answer with patience that suggested she'd accept whatever he decided. And he thought, I'm going to regret this, but he said, Okay, Your Highness, I accept your courtship, with the understanding that I'm probably going to disappoint you when you realize I'm genuinely as unremarkable as I claim to be. I'll take that risk, Liara said, and her joy was bright enough to light the entire hall. Thank you, Alex, for saying yes, for being yourself instead of performing. That's all I'm asking. Just be who you are and let me decide if that's what I want. The ceremony continued around them, but everything had shifted. The formal candidates still stood in the center, now suddenly irrelevant. The court whispered and speculated about the human who'd been chosen over nobles and warriors. And Alex stood there, having agreed to something that terrified him, wondering how exactly his carefully maintained anonymity had exploded so spectacularly in a single evening. Queen Thessara approached, and her expression had shifted from shocked recognition to something more complex. Mr. Kane, we need to talk, privately, about what happened 20 years ago and what's happening now. Your Majesty, with respect, I really don't think. That wasn't a request, Mr. Kane. My daughter has chosen you. I owe you a debt, and I need to understand who you are before I decide whether to approve my daughter's choice. So we will talk. Tomorrow first bell, don't be late. She swept away, leaving Alex to face Liara, who was still smiling like this was the best decision she'd ever made. Welcome to your new life, Alex Kane, Liara said cheerfully. I promise it won't be as terrible as you're currently imagining. Your Highness, I'm imagining it's going to be spectacularly terrible in ways I can't even anticipate yet. Then you're probably right, but we'll navigate the terribleness together. That's what courtship is for. Alex looked at the princess, at her certainty and her hope and her complete lack of concern about the complications ahead, and thought again. I'm definitely going to regret this. But for the first time in 20 years, part of him wondered if maybe regret wasn't the only possible outcome. Maybe, possibly, this could be something else entirely. He just had no idea what. The private audience chamber was smaller than Alex expected, which somehow made it more intimidating rather than less. Queen Thessara sat in a chair that managed to be both elegant and functional, her formal robes exchanged for something simpler but no less regal. Her amber eyes tracked Alex as he entered, and he fought the urge to fidget under that assessing gaze. "Sit, Mr. Kane," Thessara said, gesturing to a chair across from her. "We have much to discuss." Alex sat, keeping his posture straight through military training that was 2 decades old but apparently never left your muscle memory. "Your Majesty, if this is about last night, I want to be clear that I had no idea the princess would. I know. My daughter's choice surprised everyone, including apparently you." Thessara's ears tilted in what Alex's cultural database weakly suggested was amusement. "But that's not why I asked you here. At least, not the primary reason." She leaned forward slightly. 20 years ago, on Can 7, the embassy explosion. I need you to tell me exactly what happened from your perspective, because my memories of that day are fragmented by pain and shock, and the official reports are frustratingly vague about who saved me. Alex took a breath, pulling up memories he deliberately avoided examining for 2 decades. "I was working contract mining on Can 7. Independent operator, small crew, nothing glamorous. We were doing survey work about 3 kilometers from the diplomatic quarter when the explosion hit. The first explosion was the embassy itself," Thessara said. "Planted charges, later determined to be from a Krell separatist cell trying to disrupt alliance negotiations." "Right. We felt the shockwave, saw the smoke. My crew chief wanted to evacuate immediately, standard protocol when things go sideways on contract work. But I saw the secondary collapses starting, realized there were probably people trapped and—" Alex paused, searching for how to explain decisions that had felt obvious at the time but looked reckless in retrospect. "I couldn't leave without checking, so I went in." "Against orders," Thessara observed. "Very much against orders. I got fired for it, actually. But Your Majesty, there were people dying in that rubble. I had field medicine training from my military service. It seemed wrong to just evacuate when I could help." "You found me in the collapsed eastern wing. I found several people. You were the most critically injured who was still alive. The others—" Alex stopped, the memories less pleasant now. "The others were already gone. I stabilized what I could. Basic field medicine, pressure bandages, makeshift splints. Called for emergency services on the general frequency. Stayed until I heard the rescue teams arriving." "And then you left," Thessara said. "Before they arrived. Before anyone could identify you or thank you or document your presence." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Why?" It was the question Alex had been dreading. "Because I didn't want recognition, didn't want reward. Didn't want to be identified as the person who'd saved the crown princess, because that kind of attention." He struggled for words that didn't reveal too much. "That kind of attention complicates things, makes life harder. I just wanted to help, and then go back to being anonymous." Thessara's expression suggested she heard what Alex wasn't saying. "Mr. Kane, I've read what little records exist about you. Military service, 8 years, honorable discharge with commendations. Then you disappeared into contract work on frontier worlds, moving every few years, staying away from anywhere with significant alliance or sovereignty presence. That's the pattern of someone avoiding attention, very deliberately. I like quiet, Your Majesty. Frontier mining is quiet. It's also isolated, dangerous. The kind of work people do when they're running from something. Thessara's voice was gentle but firm. What are you running from, Alex Kane? Alex met her eyes directly. With respect, Your Majesty, that's personal history that doesn't affect my suitability for your daughter's courtship. If you're concerned about my background, I can provide military records, employment history, character references from people I've worked with. But my reasons for preferring anonymity are my own. Normally, I would agree. But my daughter has chosen you, which means your history becomes relevant to the sovereignty's interests. Thessara paused. However, I'm not going to press for information you're unwilling to share. Not yet. Instead, I'm going to tell you what I remember about the man who saved me, and you can decide if you want to correct any misperceptions. She settled back in her chair. I remember someone who moved efficiently under pressure, who made medical decisions quickly and correctly despite primitive equipment, who spoke to me calmly while working, keeping me conscious and focused, who, when I tried to thank him, just said, "You're welcome," like saving a crown princess's life was routine courtesy rather than heroic action. It wasn't heroic, Your Majesty. It was just necessary. That's exactly what he said, word for word actually, which is interesting. Thessara's ears tilted forward, attention, interest. Alex, I've spent 20 years owing a debt to someone I couldn't find. Someone who saved my life and asked for nothing in return. And now that person is here, has been chosen by my daughter, and is trying very hard to minimize what he did. I find that fascinating. Your Majesty, I'm really not that interesting. I'm a mining engineer who made one decent decision 2 decades ago, and has spent the time since doing unremarkable work on unremarkable worlds. And yet my daughter looked at you and saw something worth choosing over nobles and warriors and scholars with impressive credentials. Thessara leaned forward again. Liara has good instincts, better than she knows. So I'm going to ask you plainly, why did you agree to her courtship? You could have refused. I would have allowed it despite the debt. Why say yes? Alex was quiet for a moment, organizing thoughts he wasn't entirely comfortable examining. Because Princess Liara looked at a room full of people performing their best qualities and chose the one person trying to be invisible, that's either terrible judgment or remarkable insight. I was curious which one it was. And I don't know yet. But Your Majesty, your daughter was honest about what she wanted, someone who doesn't calculate every interaction for advantage. I can be that, because I genuinely don't want political advantage. I just want. He paused. I want her to be right about me, to not be disappointed when she discovers I'm exactly as boring as I claim. You're afraid you'll disappoint her. I'm certain I'll disappoint her, Your Majesty. I'm not suited for court life. I don't understand political maneuvering. I'm going to say the wrong thing at formal functions and probably offend important people by accident. The question isn't whether I'll be disappointing. It's whether the princess will realize that before or after it becomes politically awkward. Thessara studied him for a long moment. Alex, I'm going to share something with you that I rarely tell people. When I was younger, before I became queen, I had very fixed ideas about what kind of person would be suitable as a consort. Political value, strategic alliances, impressive credentials, all the things the court told me mattered. She smiled, but it carried sadness. And then I married for exactly those reasons. A union that made perfect political sense and absolutely no personal sense. It wasn't terrible. We were cordial, we fulfilled our duties, we produced an heir. But it wasn't. It wasn't what I would have chosen if I'd been free to choose based on character rather than calculation. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Don't be. I made my choices understanding the costs. But I don't want my daughter to make the same ones. Thessara's expression intensified. Liara could choose any of those impressive candidates. They would all make politically valuable consorts. They would all strengthen the sovereignty through their connections and capabilities. But Alex, none of them would make her happy. I've watched her study their profiles, seen her treat the selection process like a diplomatic negotiation rather than a personal choice. Until last night. Until she chose the least qualified candidate in the hall. Until she chose someone who makes her eyes light up with genuine interest instead of political assessment. That matters, Alex. That matters more than you seem to think it does. Alex absorbed this, feeling the weight of what Thesara wasn't quite saying, that she wanted her daughter to have something she herself hadn't had. Your Majesty, what if I can't be what the princess needs? What if I'm too ordinary? It succeeds or fails based on whether you're compatible, not because of past obligations. Clear. Crystal clear, Your Majesty. Good, now go find Liara. She's been waiting to show you the palace gardens and is probably vibrating with impatience by now. Alex stood, bowed with the formal precision his military training insisted on, and made it halfway to the door before Thesara spoke again. Alex, Your Majesty, thank you for saving me 20 years ago, for agreeing to let my daughter court you now, for being someone who values life and character over advantage and recognition. Those qualities are rarer than you think. Alex didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and left, his mind spinning with everything that had just happened. He found Liara waiting in the corridor outside, trying to look casually patient and failing completely. Well, she asked immediately. What did my mother say? Did she grill you, threaten you, approve? I couldn't tell from her expression when she summoned you. She told me about her own marriage, Alex said. About choosing for political reasons, and how she doesn't want you to do the same. Also, she threatened to protect me from courtiers while we figure out if this is actually going to work. Liara's expression cycled through several emotions, surprise, understanding, something that looked like relief. She told you about my father. She never talks about him. That means she's serious about supporting this. Your Highness, Liara, please, if we're going to do this courtship properly, you need to use my name. Liara, Alex corrected, the name feeling strange in his mouth. Your mother said you wanted to show me the palace gardens. I do. They're beautiful this time of year, and I thought we could talk somewhere less formal than throne rooms and audience chambers. Liara smiled, and it was bright enough to push back some of Alex's lingering anxiety. Come on. Let me show you why I love this place. And Alex, stop looking so terrified. I'm not going to bite. I'm not terrified of you, you're Liara. I'm terrified of everything this represents. The attention, the politics, the fact that hundreds of people are going to judge me as unsuitable and probably be right. Let them judge. I chose you. That's what matters. Liara took his hand, first physical contact between them, and Alex felt warmth that had nothing to do with Varathi physiology. Now come on. Gardens first, existential anxiety about suitability second. She pulled him down the corridor, and Alex let himself be pulled, wondering how exactly he'd gone from anonymous mining engineer to person being courted by an alien princess in less than 24 hours. His life had been so much simpler yesterday. But looking at Liara's smile, at her obvious joy in something as simple as showing him gardens, Alex thought maybe simple wasn't always better. Maybe sometimes complicated could be worth it. He just hoped he didn't disappoint her too badly when she figured out he really was as ordinary as he claimed. The palace gardens were, objectively, the most beautiful thing Alex had ever seen. Crystalline fountains that seemed to grow from living stone, flowering plants, from a dozen worlds creating riot of colors that shouldn't have worked together, but somehow did. Paths that curved through spaces designed for contemplation and privacy. Liara led him through it all with enthusiasm that was thoroughly unroyal, pointing out her favorite flowers, explaining the history of various sections, telling stories about childhood adventures among the hedges. I used to hide here when court functions got overwhelming, she said, stopping beside a fountain whose water flowed upward before cascading down in patterns that defied physics. My mother would find me eventually, but she'd always give me 10 minutes of peace first. She understood that sometimes you need to escape. Your mother seems remarkably understanding, Alex observed. She is. More than most people realize. Liara sat on the fountain's edge, patted the space beside her in invitation. Alex, can I ask you something? And will you give me honest answer instead of diplomatic evasion? Alex sat, maintaining careful distance that Liara immediately noticed and smiled at. I can try honest. Diplomatic evasion isn't really my skill set anyway. Why did you really say yes last night? I know what you told the court. Curiosity about whether I had good judgment or terrible instincts. But what's the real reason? Alex was quiet for a moment, organizing thoughts. Because you looked at me and saw something worth choosing when I was trying very hard not to be seen. That's not something that happens often. Usually people look at me and see exactly what I present, unremarkable, forgettable, someone you wouldn't notice in a crowd. You looked deeper than that, and you wanted to know why. I wanted to know if you were right, if there's actually something there worth seeing, or if you're just really good at finding meaning in empty space. Liara laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. Alex, you're doing it again. Dismissing yourself, minimizing your own value. It's like you're allergic to accepting that you might be interesting. I'm not allergic, I'm just realistic. Liara, I'm a mining engineer. I spend my time analyzing mineral compositions and planning extraction operations. That's not interesting. That's technical. Tell me about it. About what? About mining engineering. About what you do, why you do it, what makes it worth doing. Liara shifted to face him more directly. Alex, you've spent 2 conversations telling me you're boring. Prove it. Tell me about your work, and let me decide if it's as uninteresting as you claim. Alex blinked, thrown by the directness. Your Highness, Liara, you don't actually want to hear about mineral extraction methodologies. No one wants to hear about that. I do, because it's what you care about which makes it interesting by definition. So tell me, what made you become a mining engineer? What's the appeal? Alex found himself talking despite his certainty that this would bore her within minutes. He explained how he'd fallen into mining after military service, how the combination of technical analysis and physical work appealed to him, how there was something satisfying about finding resources that other people had missed. It's like solving puzzles, he said, warming to the subject despite himself. You look at geological surveys, mineral compositions, extraction difficulty, and you figure out the optimal approach. Most miners go for obvious deposits, easy extraction. But the interesting work is finding the resources other people wrote off as too difficult or too marginal, making the impossible extractions work through creative engineering. So you're good at seeing value where others see difficulty, Liara observed. I'm good at mineral analysis and extraction methodology, which requires seeing value where others see difficulty. Alex, do you not hear what you're describing? You look at resources everyone else has dismissed and find ways to make them valuable. You solve problems other people have given up on. That's exactly the kind of thinking that's valuable beyond mining operations. Alex was quiet, processing that interpretation. I never thought about it that way. Because you're busy minimizing yourself, instead of actually examining what you're good at. Liara's tone was gentle but firm. Let me tell you what I see, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. I see someone who's intelligent enough to solve complex problems, but humble enough to not announce that intelligence. Someone who's been trained for combat but chose technical work instead, which suggests you value creation over destruction. Someone who saved my mother's life and then disappeared because recognition made you uncomfortable, which means you act based on principle rather than reward. She moved closer, and Alex found himself unable to retreat. I see someone who spent 20 years avoiding attention so successfully that even people actively looking for you couldn't find you. That takes planning, discipline, and resources most people don't have. So either you're running from something, or you're protecting something, or both. And Alex, I don't need to know which one it is right now. But I need you to stop telling me you're ordinary when you're clearly not. Liara, no, stop dismissing yourself. Stop minimizing what you are. You don't have to perform impressiveness like the formal candidates. That's not what I want. But you also don't get to pretend you're nothing special when you saved the Queen's life, built a career in dangerous work, and apparently have skills that let you disappear so completely that sovereignty resources couldn't track you. That's not ordinary. That's remarkable in quiet ways. Alex looked at her certainty and her frustration and her genuine interest in understanding him, and felt something shift inside him. You're not going to let this go, are you? Not a chance. I chose you because I saw something real. I'm not letting you talk me out of it by insisting you're boring. Liara smiled. So here's the deal. You be honestly yourself, including the parts you think are unimpressive, and let me decide what matters. No more self-deprecation. No more claims of ordinariness. Just Alex Kane, mining engineer with mysterious past and remarkable ability to save queens and disappear. Deal. That's going to be harder than you think. Good. If it was easy, you'd be performing instead of being genuine. I want the hard honesty, Alex. That's the whole point. They sat together by the fountain, and Alex realized he was smiling despite his discomfort, despite his certainty that this was going to end badly, despite everything screaming that he should run before he got attached to something that couldn't last. Okay, he said. Deal. I'll try to stop dismissing myself, but Liara, I need you to promise something in return. What? If you figure out I'm not what you thought, if the reality doesn't match your instinct, you'll tell me directly instead of trying to preserve my feelings. I'd rather know honestly that it's not working than have you pretend out of politeness. I can do that. Though, Alex, I don't think you understand how unlikely it is that you'll disappoint me. My instincts are usually pretty accurate. But we'll see. Yes, we will. Liara stood, offered her hand. Come on. There's more garden to see, and I want to show you the star viewing platform before dinner. Plus, we need to prepare you for tonight's formal reception, where you'll be officially introduced as my chosen courtship candidate, and probably field about 1,000 uncomfortable questions from nobles trying to figure out who you are. Alex groaned. Can't we skip that part? Absolutely not. You agreed to courtship, which means you agreed to all the terrible formal obligations that come with it. But don't worry. I'll be right beside you, and my mother has already sent word that anyone who's excessively rude will answer to her personally. You're protected. I'm doomed. You're fine. You survived actual combat. You can survive nobles making snide comments about your lack of title. Combat was easier. Combat had clear objectives and rules of engagement. So does court politics. The rules are just more subtle. Liara pulled him along the garden path. But Alex, seriously, you'll be fine. Just be yourself, answer honestly when people ask questions, and remember that I chose you. That matters more than whatever credentials they think you should have. But Alex let himself be pulled, wondering again how his life had gotten so spectacularly complicated in less than a day. But looking at Liara's profile as she explained the history of some flowering plant, seeing her genuine enthusiasm for sharing things she loved, Alex thought maybe complicated wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Maybe complicated could even be good if you were navigating it with someone who actually saw you. He just hoped he could live up to what she saw, because disappointing her would be worse than any amount of court politics or noble judgment. That mattered more than he'd expected it to. The formal reception was exactly as terrible as Alex had anticipated, and somehow worse in ways he hadn't predicted. The grand hall was full again, but this time instead of being anonymous background scenery, Alex was standing beside Princess Liara on a raised platform where everyone could see him, where everyone was actively looking at him, assessing him, judging him, trying to understand why the princess had chosen this unremarkable human over impressive candidates who actually made sense. Breathe, Liara murmured beside him. You look like you're facing execution. This is worse than execution. Execution would be over quickly. Dramatic, I like it, shows hidden depths. She squeezed his hand briefly. They were allowed casual physical contact now that courtship was official, which Alex found both comforting and terrifying. Just remember, be yourself, answer honestly. Let me handle anyone who gets too aggressive. The first wave of nobles approached, with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Lord Thurian, the military candidate who'd clearly expected to be chosen, led the group with barely concealed disdain. "Mr. Kane," Thurian said, and his tone made the simple address sound like insult. "I confess myself curious about your qualifications. Your profile lists mining engineering as primary occupation, with no noble house affiliation, no military rank beyond standard service, no obvious political value. What exactly does Princess Liara see in such humble credentials?" Alex felt Liara tense beside him, preparing to intervene, but he spoke first. "Lord Thurian, I have exactly the qualifications you listed. Mining, engineering, and humble credentials. If the princess sees something beyond that, you'll have to ask her because I'm as confused as you are." Liara's hand tightened on his, warning or support he wasn't sure. "Lord Thurian, I see someone who doesn't calculate every interaction for advantage. Someone who's comfortable enough with himself that he doesn't need to prove his value through impressive credentials. Someone genuine in a court full of performance. That's what I see." "Genuine," Thurian repeated, like the word tasted strange. "Your Highness, with respect, the sovereignty needs more than genuine. It needs strategic alliances, military strength, political acumen. Can Mr. Kane provide any of those things? Can you provide genuine disinterest in power?" Liara countered. "Because that's what I value, and it's considerably rarer than military strategy." The exchange would have escalated, but Queen Thessara's voice cut through the tension. "Lord Thurian, you're questioning my daughter's judgment. I suggest you reconsider that approach." Thurian bowed stiffly and retreated, but his expression promised this wasn't over. More nobles approached, each with their own version of the same question. "What makes you qualified?" Alex answered honestly every time, that he wasn't qualified by traditional standards, that he didn't understand why the princess had chosen him, that he was just trying to be himself and let her decide if that was enough. Some nobles accepted this with grudging respect. Others clearly thought he was performing false modesty. A few looked at him like he was a puzzle they couldn't solve. Ambassador Valen, the diplomatic candidate, took a different approach. "Mr. Kane, I understand you saved Queen Thessara's life 20 years ago. Remarkable coincidence that you ended up here, being chosen by her daughter. Almost too remarkable." The implication was clear. Alex was leveraging past heroics for current advantage. "Ambassador, I tried very hard not to end up here," Alex said flatly. "I declined the invitation to this ceremony multiple times. I was only here as diplomatic courtesy, not as a candidate. And I had no idea the princess would choose me. If you're suggesting I orchestrated this somehow, I can assure you I'm not nearly that clever. And yet here you stand, chosen by the princess, protected by the queen who owes you a debt. Convenient." "Convenient would be if I'd actually wanted any of this," Alex shot back, his patience fraying. "Ambassador, I'm a mining engineer who likes quiet and obscurity. This is literally my nightmare scenario, standing in front of hundreds of people being judged for qualifications I don't have. If I was calculating for advantage, I would have planned something less horrifically uncomfortable." Liara stepped forward, her voice carrying royal authority. "Ambassador Valen, you're suggesting my choice was manipulated. I take offense to that. I chose Alex Kane because I saw qualities I valued. The fact that he also saved my mother's life 20 years ago is remarkable coincidence, not calculated manipulation. If you question that further, you question my judgment and my mother's. I suggest you consider whether that's wise." Valen retreated, but Alex could see the calculation in his eyes. This wasn't acceptance, just tactical withdrawal. The reception continued for 3 more hours, each one feeling longer than the last. Alex answered the same questions repeatedly, endured the same skeptical assessments, watched nobles try to figure out if he was secretly impressive or actually as ordinary as he claimed. By the time it ended, he was exhausted in ways that mining operations never made him. Liara found him afterward in a quiet alcove where he'd retreated to process everything. "You survived," she said, sitting beside him. "Better than I expected, actually. You didn't punch anyone or flee dramatically. I considered both options multiple times. I know I was tracking your expressions. You have a very readable face when you're stressed." She smiled. "But Alex, you did well. You were honest, you didn't try to impress anyone, you let me defend you when necessary. That's exactly what I needed you to do. Everyone thinks you've made a terrible choice. Everyone thinks they understand what makes a good choice. They're wrong." Liara took his hand. "Alex, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it instead of dismissing it. Okay? You saved my mother's life 20 years ago. Not because it was politically valuable, not because you wanted reward, but because she was dying and you could help. That single action tells me more about your character than any amount of impressive credentials could. You value life over advantage. That's rare, that's precious. That's exactly what I want in a consort." "Liara, I'm not finished. You've spent the last day trying to convince me you're ordinary, unimpressive, not worth my choice. But everything you do contradicts that. You answer honestly even when honesty makes you look bad. You don't perform confidence you don't feel. You prioritize others' well-being over your own comfort. Those qualities are extraordinary, Alex. The fact that you don't recognize them as such just proves my point." Alex was quiet for a long moment. "What if I can't be what the sovereignty needs? What if my lack of political value actually matters when it comes to supporting your rule? Then we'll figure that out together." "But Alex, my mother ruled beside a consort chosen for political value, and it made her effective but not happy. I'd rather choose someone who makes me happy and figure out the political aspects as we go. Can you understand that?" "I can try." "Good." Liara stood, pulled him up with her. "Now come on. My mother wants to have dinner with us, informal, just the three of us. She wants to tell you stories about when I was younger and embarrass me thoroughly. You'll enjoy it. Your mother is terrifying. She likes you. That's why she's terrifying on your behalf instead of at you. Big difference." They walked together toward the royal quarters, and Alex reflected that his life had become unrecognizable in less than 48 hours. But looking at Liara's profile, at her confidence and her certainty, and her complete lack of doubt about choosing him, Alex thought maybe unrecognizable wasn't the same as bad. Maybe it was just different. Maybe different could even be good if you were brave enough to stop fighting it. He still thought he'd probably disappoint her eventually. Still thought this courtship would end when she realized he really was as ordinary as he claimed. But for now, he'd follow her lead. Be honest. Try not to minimize himself constantly. See if maybe, possibly, her instinct was right. Because disappointing her would hurt more than any amount of noble judgment or court politics. And that meant something. That meant she'd already become important in ways he hadn't anticipated. He just hoped he didn't mess this up too badly. 6 months later, Alexander Kane stood beside Princess Liara during the formal announcement of their engagement, and the entire galaxy watched as a mining engineer with no title became the future consort to the Verathi throne. The court had eventually accepted him, some grudgingly, others with genuine respect earned through 6 months of watching him support Liara without trying to control her. Queen Thessara had cried, privately, but Liara had told him about it anyway, because her daughter had chosen someone who valued her for herself rather than her position. And Alex had finally stopped arguing that he was ordinary, because Liara had spent 6 months proving that ordinary was exactly what she'd been looking for. Sometimes the best choices are the ones that make no political sense but perfect personal sense. Sometimes past debts and future hopes collide in ways that look...
Está bueno, va. A la verga, no sabía que había tanta cosa aquí. Ah, pero es como más gamer acá arriba, güey. Sí, es más gamer acá arriba. Creo que acá arriba también están los carros, güey.
Ojalá ver a James en cosplay de Chun-Li.
Oh. No.
Hay chisme de algo, luego te cuento, sí.
Inga, toma, no me digas eso. Busquen una pinche maqui, cabrón. Una maqui.
Podemos ver a los cosplayers a los que te pedían tomarles foto.
A los cosplayers que me pueden tomar foto, ¿cómo?
Búsquenle cicatrices que no podemos ver,
No, tenemos que ver cicatrices. Pues son los mismos carros que vimos, güey. O sea, no cambian los carros, son los mismos que vimos en la convención pasada, güey. Un Corvette, un Subaru. Ah, este de Ganjo está perro, güey. Por si no sabían, güey, Ganjo es una de mis
Aquí arriba cada casi stand tiene un cosplayer, hubieran servido para la cuesta anterior.
Es una de mis personajes de mis favoritos, güey.
Es tu waifu.
Sí. Ajá. So, sería Ganju, Miyako y ¿quién más? Y Rem. Son mis top.
No la conozco.
Qué bueno, porque es mía nomás. Qué bueno. Mira un Pikachu volador.
¿Y ese Pikachu?
Está volando, güey. El Wii.
¿Cómo te sientes, Wii?
¿Cómo? Ya un poquito mejor, güey. Ya un poquito mejor ya. Y aquí ya no hay nada. Sí, aquí no hay nada. De regreso.